Good afternoon, Links family. My name is Tierza Watts. I'm the Director of Student Life and Campus Community here at CU Denver. I'm pleased that you've taken the time out of your afternoon to join us as we do our first lead workshop for the fall 2020 semester. These workshops take place every Wednesday afternoon at 3:30 through Thanksgiving week. And after that, we'll pick them back up in February and have workshops every Wednesday through the end of April. You can find Zoom links for future workshops in the MyLinks portal. MyLinks is located at ucdenver.edu/MyLinks. Today, we're pleased to have 4 special guests with us to help us discuss the topic, how to be a social justice leader post-George Floyd. So this time, I'd like to introduce those 4 panelists. Sweeann Moreno is the Graduate Assistant in the LatinX Student Services Department within the Center for Identity and Inclusion. Omar Montgomery serves as the Director of Black Student Services in the Center for Identity and Inclusion here at CU Denver. Raquel Nelson is the Campus Life Development Coordinator and African American Heritage Committee Chair at the College of Southern Nevada. And Katie Leonard is an artist and community organizer. And this year she's serving as the activist in residence in CAM, the College of Arts and Media. So this time I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Give us a little bit more information about them. We'd love to get to know them. And if they would share their thoughts on our topic about how to be a social justice leader in today's environment. And so I'm going to invite Sweeann to go first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Sweeann Moreno once again. I'm with CII, the Center for Identity and Inclusion and Latinx Student Services. I'm a graduate assistant at CII, and I'm also a graduate student for the Masters of Humanities and Social Sciences with an emphasis in digital studies and digital activisms. I think it's a revolutionary time to go ahead and be here, and I'm very excited about this opportunity and talk about how to be a wholesome activist from the inside out.
Okay, Racquel, would you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, my name is Raquel Nelson. I am the Campus Life Development Coordinator at the College of Southern Nevada. We are a community college in Las Vegas. We have about 40,000 students between our 3 campuses. And I also serve as the chair for the African American Heritage Committee. We work in partnership with our BSU, which is a Black Student Union. So I connect the faculty and staff for the college who identify as Black or African American. And I think this is such a great conversation. I'm excited to be a part of it. We are in the midst of this at the College of Southern Nevada. I know with the work that I do with the African American Heritage Committee, we are change makers. We just had our convocation with our president, and I look forward to just sharing some of the things that are happening at CSN. But being a social change leader right now, it is nonstop. That's the word that comes to mind. And so really battling that racial battle fatigue, where we're not getting worn out, not tiring in the work that we're doing, because we know that change is going to come. And so I'm excited to join this conversation with all of you.
Thank you. Omar, would you give us a little more information about you and your thoughts on being a social justice leader today?
First of all, it is an honor to be on here with all the different panelists. Thank you for putting this together, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. My name is Omar Montgomery. I'm the Director of Black Student Services at the University of Colorado, Denver, and an adjunct instructor in the Political Science Department and Ethnic Studies Department. George Floyd. The George Floyd video changed everything, although there's been many videos before. 1992, Rodney King, you had the taping. Actually, you did have a tape in pictures of 1965, the Watts riots, what took place and what caused that to take place. You even had 2 Los Angeles police departments that were under scrutiny during that time, similar to how they are today. It was Los Angeles Police Department under the Parker administration and under the Gates administration. I say all that to say that unfortunately lessons wasn't learned then. And now you have communities that have come up and said, hey, We want our voice to be heard. And as I begin to close, what's happening on two different spectrums, because I'm also president of the Aurora branch of the NAACP, so I could put on my community hat as well as my academic hat. And what I'm seeing is that's promising is the protest and seeing change. Where I'm beginning to see the stress factors is people who are aligned together now turning against each other. And then spending a lot of time figuring out, are you the best liberal? Are you the best conservative? Are you protesting right? Are you not protesting right? Are you black enough, not black enough? All these different things now are turning more internally. And we have to figure out how to heal while simultaneously doing this work. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Katie, we'd love to learn more about you and your thoughts on being a social justice leader today.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I am a co-organizer for Anti-Racist Club Colorado, which we formed shortly after the lynching of George Floyd here in Colorado, in an effort to keep systemic racism at the forefront of the conversation through community education and civic engagement. We've done rallies and protests and demonstrations and teach-ins and sit-ins to keep the momentum going. I think I'm very much in the trenches. I'm tired. You can probably see that. But I'm also really inspired, and I'm learning so much, and I'm going through a lot of what Mr. Montgomery just spoke about. There's a lot of, tension within these movement groups, and there's so many different factions that shouldn't be factions. So that's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there is sort of this, it's a two-way fight sometimes, which is unfortunate. And I'm actually reading a book called Emergent Strategy right now by Adrienne Marie Brown, and I would recommend that book to anyone. And it's really about how 21st century social movements are so different because of social media and because of this element of celebrity, but also because we know so much, we learn so much from the civil rights movement. And it really elevates these ideas of mimicking nature in ecosystems in our organizations and in our organizing. And so the way that I've thought about what we're trying to do here to sort of ease tension within group is operating more like a flock of birds and concentrating more on the depth of relationships than quantity and critical mass. So those are some ideas that I've been playing with and practicing and living through. And this idea of a flock of birds is something that I hope to bring up in later questions as well. But it's a rotation, right? So birds lead, and then they go back, and they'll go out to the outside, and it's all about awareness and spatial awareness, and it's a lot of what we're doing right now. So a bit of a convoluted answer, but I'm really happy to be here today.
I appreciate you mentioning the flock of birds. I've often used a story of geese because they rotate leadership, and people, when they get tired at the front, will rotate to the side or the back where they're drafting off of somebody else's energy who's maybe more refreshed. I think that's an interesting and important point. Well, to start off our planned questions, CU Denver is committed to developing socially responsible student leaders. And so social responsibility, really, if you boil it down to a nice, easy definition, is awareness as a leader that your decisions have an impact on yourself, the people within the group that you're leading or you're participating in, and they also have an impact on the community around you. And so my first question really is focused on college student leadership skills. So the question is, what are the leadership skills college students need to be effective leaders within social justice movements? And I'll open it up for any of you, or I can call on somebody, however you'd like to do it. Raquel, would you like to go first?
I can share. I think So I'm in this too. So I find myself to be a lifelong learner. And in my role as the chair of the African American Heritage Committee, I have mentors that I go to. And I think one of the skills that I am fine tuning is that space where I do some self-reflection before I take whatever that next step is. Am I the right person to lead this particular conversation? So we were going to the president of our college as a faculty and staff to make some demands for change, and having that conversation. Am I the right person? Who are the right spokespeople to have this conversation? And just because I'm the chair of the committee doesn't always mean that it's me. And being okay with like finding who that right person is to do the job, whatever that next step is. So that skill, having that sense of humility of it doesn't always have to be my face at the forefront, leading this conversation. And I think a willingness to challenge the process. And so being able to find your voice and know exactly what is it that you're looking for, and being willing to ask specifically what you want to see happen. You know, for us, it was, I'm not a new professional, but I'm new to what I'm doing right now. And so sitting in our meeting with our president and saying, I want you at convocation to come out and say to this community that Black Lives Matter. Earlier in the summer, the president put out some communication surrounding what happened with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, but did not say Black Lives Matter. And for our community, it was like, no, we need to know that you stand with us, and we need you to state it clearly to the entire college community. But for me, it was pushing me out of my comfort zone to be that direct with the president of our institution. And so being willing to be stretched is really a skill that I think all of us need, and for college students, that willingness to be stretched and come out of your comfort zone.
Thank you. Would somebody else like to comment on that question?
Sure, if I can make a comment, I think intersectionality is important. It's important to work with each other and for each other, because we can't do it alone. I'm part of LatinX Student Services, and we stand with Black lives. We stand for Black lives, and we bridge the gap for Black lives, because the fight is not just your own. And I think that one of the most important things to do is to gain that strength from each other, but also gain that allyship, so that way the movement can grow. And there's definitely strength in numbers, and not being afraid of building those connections and reinforcing them in order to be successful.
Thank you.
I'll build on that. Solidarity, truth-telling, both very important. For me, imagination, fortifying your imagination. Everything that we're living right now, the awful things, the wonderful things, they were literally conjured up, right? They came from in here, and now they're in the world. And I think it's so frustrating for me every day, because he was saying, I was helping with like the Peace Force legislation here in Denver, and radically reimagining what public safety needs to look like, what the world needs to look like. And people always say, well, how are you going to do that? Or they think it's, you know, crazy. And it's so important that we consider the fact that we fantasize about the end of the world all the time. It's so easy for us to imagine the end of the world. There's movies and books about it. But when you say, well, can you imagine a more peaceful or equitable future? People think you're crazy, right? It's harder for us to imagine that than it is disaster. And so I would say what we need to do, especially as young people, is really fortify our imaginations and be courageous. Because if something awful, 400, 500 years, something awful came from someone's imagination, we can just as easily set forth 400 and 500 years of something fantastic from our imaginations. But it takes courage and solidarity and truth telling, for sure.
And hope.
Yeah.
And just to add to those beautiful statements that were made by everyone else, I may be the more senior person on this call just based on my gray hair. So
Mine is under hair dye.
Yours under hair dye? I don't know. I think I got you beat. But with that stated, I was actually president of my Black Student Union when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going up against one of my own professors.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sitting in that room and we laid into him. When I say we laid into him, we laid into him. And he just sat back and he looked. Now, by the way, my father was on faculty, so my father's in the room too. So he's getting it from me as well. And I remember, since they both had a different relationship with me, they pulled me over. And I thought they were going to jump me. I thought I was going to get just literally beat up. And they said, Omar, we love your passion, but there's a few other skills you need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
You need to learn how to listen. You need to learn how to be flexible. And you need to learn the difference between protesting that's an event and protesting that has outcomes.
Mm.
And in many cases, people want to do, I want to hold the megaphone. I want to, and for those who've been in these rallies, you see them at megaphone time. But when it comes to putting down a strategic plan, you can't find it. And so we have to teach our students about what does it really take to have systemic change? What does it really take to prepare to talk in front of city council, to talk to your college president? And I'll leave with this. There was a Sudanese student group, a lot of people that talked about the change of the high school, the name of the high school in Stapleton. Mm-hmm. That was done by an organized Sudanese student group that had been organizing with each other for a year and knew the long game and knew that protesting wasn't an event, that it was about strategic planning as well. So those are the skill sets I think our youth need to have, on top of us older folk getting out the way so that they can lead.
Thank you. All of you, those were wonderful comments and skills for our students to focus on. Well, you know, one of the things that I've observed in my lifetime is really looking at the place of disruptive leadership, that often it's being disruptive that we finally get others' attentions. And so my question is, being disruptive is sometimes necessary to actually make change. How have you embraced disruptive leadership in your journey? Omar, you want to go first?
Not really. There's an inside joke between two of us right now.
Okay.
I would say that I've been involved in a lot of protests. I've been involved in a lot of community action that was disruptive. And once again, I think it's needed. I think it's something that we need to be measured in how we do it. Because after a while, that cry no longer is valid. Once you've done it so many times, once you've done it the same way so many times, once you have done it to the point where the people who you're doing it for, you're getting on their nerves, then you have to go back and say, okay, what are the next steps and what's the transition? The disruption is for the attention getter. And then after that, what is the plan to move forward and create that systemic change?
Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts?
Sure, I'll definitely second that with Mr. Montgomery. It's very important to make sure you have your voice heard. you need to go ahead and disrupt the system in order to create the change, because the way things are working right now are not working. So it's important to make sure that you create that space for yourself and you kind of nudge your way in to make sure that your voice is heard and validated. It's also important to make sure that you do measure yourself in regards to what you're saying and compose yourself. But also it's important to go ahead and create the action and change you want to create. A lot of times, because we are students, because I'm a graduate student, because we're undergraduate students, because we're freshmen, we think that our voice doesn't matter, but we have so much power within us to help create that change. We just have to speak up.
Any other thoughts from our other two folks?
I can chime in on this one. It's a delicate balance, for sure, and I love that you've both spoken to that. In my own, current experience, it's a lot of policy meetings and also putting pressure, extreme pressure, on these same individuals, in a protest manner and fashion, or demonstration or mobilization. So it's this balance between being able to meet with people and sit down with them and speak with them, and then maybe show up at their house, right? And have a protest. And that's realistically, last week I had a meeting with a council person, and then we showed up to a place that they were, and we were, protesting. So it is being able to do both, because some people are not able to sit down and have a conversation because they vilified someone so much, right? Or they really do think, but understanding that this disruption is usually to then not always be doing this, but to be able to do that eventually, right? So it's an art form for sure.
I'll share. I think, for me, the way that I've really been learning this is that it is not in the box of here's what I do for work. That disruption for me is happening in all areas of my life and my community. I'm a huge part of my church community, and it's having those hard conversations with other people in my congregation, where it's challenging our leadership, asking those hard questions of the roles that they're in, the way that we do what we do in our faith community. And so that disruption happens, whether I'm with my staff group, whether I'm with my church, it's happening in private conversations, in relationships that I have with friends that don't look like me, but I see them posting very concerning things on their Facebook pages, and being able to engage in conversation and pick up a phone and say, hey, friend so-and-so, I read this, help me understand. And having those hard, courageous conversations where there is no boundaries, like it's happening everywhere. That's part of the reason where I was like, I feel fatigued, because there is no escape portal that I'm like, oh, here's my out. It's happening everywhere. So whether I'm, in the small group that I help with my husband at church, or whether I'm at work, having these conversations, and in whatever capacity I'm in, being able to challenge the process, whether I sit on the board and being able to challenge other members of the board, whether I'm not on a board and be able to still have hard conversations with whoever holds those positions of leadership, where recognizing that this is too important to stay silent. And that, if a door is cracked or not cracked, I'm gonna make a way to have these important conversations. I'm gonna get in there and deal with what comes afterwards. And so now it's been a lot of fallout of all the things that are coming afterwards, where you're starting, at least for me in my life, to see things that have been problematic over time beginning to be dismantled. Particularly in my church, which, you know, was the last place in my mind that I imagined these things to happen, and now they're unfolding. But it's been that pressing to have these really difficult conversations and not ease up.
Thank you, all of you, for your responses. So what should students pay attention to when we think about our nation's history and Denver's history as we work to make change moving forward?
Started out if you would like. I do a lot of history work and teaching of history. In terms of our country and our nation, we have to really be able to look back and say, we live in an imperialist, colonialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal country. And that's a mouthful. And Bell Hooks says that all the time. But that's the reality. And I think a big part of that, especially within institutions, is being able to have a Black history class, sure, and be able to not call that an alternative history, recognizing that is history, and being able to have a history class, and being able to see that history is very much a narrative, and it's more often histories. History isn't synonymous with the past. So understanding that our conception of the world is shaped in a lot of ways by indoctrination. And that's just the facts of our schooling system, and realizing that education goes further than just the classroom, and really being open and trying to inhabit a critical consciousness, which is being able to process divergent ideas and hold them right in our head at the same time, because we do in this country love to rest on this idea of American exceptionalism, and I think that once you're able to maybe hop off that horse for a second, that's where change can start happening, and I think that a lot of times that scares people, and it feels radical. And what Angela Davis always says is radicalism is really just grabbing something at the root.
Thank you. Anybody else have thoughts on that? What should we pay attention to as we work to make change moving forward?
I definitely love what Katie shared, and also in the words of Angela Davis, we have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. It has to go ahead and start within. We're in an amazing campus where we can help create that change, but we have to go ahead and listen to what we are being told, what is being said on the media. We have to go ahead and liven ourselves up and ask the questions of where this information is coming from. Is it real? Is it reliable? Is it something that's going to be a benefit for me and my people? And we have to be able to lean into those hard questions and question and untangle ourselves from everything that we have been taught. Because everything that we have been taught has been built upon the premise of white supremacy. It has been on the premise of colonialism, and we're not up for that anymore. If the time is here for change, we need to start with our minds, with our souls, with our spirits, and untangle ourselves from everything that we've been learned and taught.
Thank you.
We began to talk about the Denver metro region. There's a lot of rich history. CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, was probably one of the main civil rights organizations in Denver. They helped desegregate the taxi company, you used to call them, and they say, you always get a white one. So what they did was just tied up the phone lines to the point where they said, sooner or later, you're gonna lose business or you're gonna have to deal with this. Or the time when KKK used to walk down 16th Street Mall and try to scare everyone. And then when the 60s came and the brother that just passed last year, Lawrence, was head of the Black Panther Party, said, you know, Hey, we armed like you. And I'm not promoting violence. I'm just saying, they said, hey, we armed like you. Say, you want to come down here and disrupt? We could disrupt as well. You also had the founding of the founder of the NAACP, the Denver branch was a dentist, Clarence Holmes. So there's a lot of rich history of advocacy, of being radical. When the 60s came and our Native American, our American Indian brothers and sisters, our Black brothers and sisters, and our Latinx brothers and sisters came together for social change. Fighting against the gentrification that was taking place in North Denver, fighting against gentrification that was taking place on the east side. So there's a history of alliance, and then there's a history of being advocates. And I don't think that history is in the books. We talk about Martin Luther King, we talk about all these other folks, but what about the history right here in the Denver metro region where we made change, not just here, but in some cases was a national model for systemic change.
Thank you, thank you. That was great information. All right, so let me move on to our next question. So the death of George Floyd really fanned the flames, obviously, for people that look like me, really started paying attention a little bit more, and we need to pay attention a whole lot more to the Black Lives Matter movement if we weren't already tuned in. And it brought a resurgence of community awareness of Elijah McClain's case and other cases in Colorado. So for our folks that are local, how can we best stay informed with what's happening in the Denver community when it comes to standing up for Black lives?
I think social media is a great tool right now to understand where the demonstrations are happening and protests and things. But I think more importantly is finding ways to enter a prolonged protest, right? That isn't so demonstrative and short-lived and attention grabbing. So there are a whole lot of organizations that have been doing this work for a really long time. And you know, in all facets of you know, life, in education, in healthcare, in, you know, violence, domestic violence, in all these, that we have so many organizations that have been doing this work that is all interrelated because of intersectionality, as Sweeann mentioned earlier. So I think really there, you know, if you're interested in something specific, look it up. Say Denver, you know, education initiatives, or Denver systemic racism, Denver health, you know, there's so many different things here. People are doing really great work and have been doing really great work for a really long time. But I would encourage everyone to get involved with a group that is, you know, playing the long game.
And if I can echo on that, Katie, I think the social media aspect is definitely crucial. That's how the word is getting out. That's how the videos of police brutality is getting out. That's also how we can go ahead and get the message out in regards to the work that we're doing, and also join forces with those that are doing the work. I think that the social media for our Center for Identity and Inclusion, Latinx Student Services, Black Student Services, we're aiming to go ahead and have that social media push within our campus and university to help students know in regards to events that are happening in our direct community, in our city, in the state, in the nation, in the world. And I think that's a crucial aspect that the CU community and the students can go ahead and do to learn more, is following the social media accounts and also being able to explore and touch in on those conversations and topics that are a bit uncomfortable.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yes, and just to be very brief, when we talk about Breonna Taylor, when we talk about Elijah McClain, when we talk about the family that was stopped, and the little girl was on the ground in the prince's outfit. You know, being in the NAACP, we're sort of on the front lines of a lot of these different things, but we also have a lane. You also got to know your lane. It's not my lane to always be out there protesting. My lane is to look at how do you terminate a cop and make sure that that police officer is never a police officer again? So how do you change post-certification? How do you encourage that each officer probably needs to have their own private insurance so that they could be held accountable and that the family can end up getting some type of compensation based on the fact that that family was done wrong or that member was dead? Do we understand civil service commissions and how they play a part in these roles? So there's the protest, which I enjoy. And if I was younger, I'd be out there a lot more. But I also know my role. My role is to make sure that when my young brothers and sisters get arrested, that we as elders are able to bail them out, are able to support them the best way we can. And then if they did something wrong in that protest, to be able to share that and have that critical conversation as well. So it has to work both ways in this new era, where we have people that are out there on the front lines in one way, and then people that are behind the scenes making sure that policy is being changed, that we have things in place like 217. I know people say, well, voting is old, but I can tell you where when voting has created change. We wouldn't be in Aurora having a discussion about having an independent review board if it wasn't for the fact that we didn't have 6 progressive votes on Aurora City Council. So it's a both and. It's definitely showing up and protesting, but then it's figuring out how do we dissect this system to work for us.
I know that Jamie, who is our tech host on today's event, is doing this because we really do have to get students to understand that voting actually has ripple effects that can make change or get people in place that have a different perspective. Raquel, did you have anything to add to that question before I move on?
Yeah, I think you said it. You know, being aware of what are the local elections that are going on, who are those folks that are running, really doing some digging to find out, you know, who are these people, what do they believe, what do they think? And then, you know, whether they are the candidate that you voted for or not, once they are in that role, they're still there to help serve you. And so holding folks accountable for the decisions that they're making, what policies are they putting in place, you know, putting their feet to the fire. Are they doing what they said they were going to do when they got elected? Are they taking a different turn? And so, you know, I'm not part of the Denver community, but that's in all of our communities, knowing what's going on locally with those elected officials and putting their feet to the flame.
Yeah, I think you're right. Holding them to their platform, because obviously they spent a long time campaigning on that platform. They should work diligently to implement it or to fight through the barriers that they reach to keep bringing that message. You're absolutely right. Okay, so we've got 2 kind of question sections left. Our next one is, you know, right as we've come back to school, Jacob Blake was shot and paralyzed. In response, across the sports world, athletes took a stand for Black Lives Matter last week by holding an unprecedented wildcat strike and refused to play their regularly scheduled games. And so that brings us to the thought of, you know, what are your thoughts about using whatever platform you have to bring attention to the Black Lives Matter movement? Is it appropriate to use your job as a platform or any other group that you belong to? I guess is really my question.
For me, it's pretty straightforward in that racism and capitalism have been intertwined since the beginning of this country. Mm-hmm. So it's racial capitalism. And that is troubling and also gives you leverage in that withholding your dollars or withholding labor is a very, very powerful tool and a very effective tool. So it's a wonderful way to push, you know, change. You think about the bus boycotts, boycotting and striking are 2 sides of the same coin, and they're really important. And I think that if we can find ways to do that effectively and still have people, you know, able to sustain themselves and their families here in the 21st century, it would be unreal the amount of change we could move.
just to add to that, when we began to talk about the sports industry, it's not the first time. When you look at the Olympics and you had Carlos and all of them on there with the black fist on, talking about the issues that was taking place in the black community back then. You had Arthur Ashe as a tennis player who always talked about social justice issues. Muhammad Ali, who said I wasn't going to go to war, said I wasn't going to go and register because it went against my religion. But who knows how many more fights he could have won not having that year, but he made that sacrifice and almost went broke making that sacrifice. I think about the Serena sisters. The Serena sisters have not only been advocates for racial justice, but also gender equity as well. Talking about being paid. The women NBA has been talking about that for a very long time. I bring all those things up to say that sports has a lens that opens up the lens. When I think about Jamal Murray, who plays for the Nuggets, when he had that 50-point game, people not only talked about his 50-point game, they talked about the pictures he had on his shoes, which is of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. So sports, I think sports more than ever has, and athletes more than ever, whether it's Kaepernick taking the knee and people that, you know, that didn't understand it back then are now championing him now. So I think sports gives us a lens and an opportunity for us. I don't look for them for solutions. I look for them to bring it up so that those who are experts in those areas are supposed to find the solutions. I hate when they try to question the athlete as if they got a PhD in political science. That athlete said, I know it's wrong. And since I know it's wrong, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a voter, I expect for you to fix it. I almost went there with a couple of words, so I'm gonna leave it there.
Raquel, I'd like to ask you the follow-up question, if you're okay with that, unless you had something you wanted to say immediately.
Nope, go for it.
So the follow-up question is really about how do we help our college students identify and use whatever platform they can identify to kind of stand on that platform and about issues they care about?
So I think that's a great question. I think as a college student, identifying your sphere of influence. So where do I have that sphere? Is it my faith community? Is it my circle of friends? Is it, I'm a student leader, for student government? Is it, there's clubs and organizations that, I help oversee? So what's your sphere of influence? And then what can you do within that sphere? I think about our BSU. When everything happened with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, we got together a group of people. Our college did not immediately respond, but because of who we are and what we do, we're like, it doesn't matter if the college is not saying anything, we need to take action. And so within our sphere of influence, we gathered some folks, we tapped on our resources and said, what does our community need? We put together a series and we did a healing event of, hey, we need to talk through what are some techniques of healing? So we did a mind, body, soul. We had a counselor talk about some techniques. We had some meditation. We had a minister talk about that faith beliefs and how that can be helpful in healing. But we took the resources that we had within our sphere of influence and we put together something amazing. And the turnout was phenomenal. The stories that people shared, it was a Zoom like this, but to hear students sharing their stories, sharing their fears, hurts, concerns, faculty, staff, people cried, they supported each other, they vented, but we created this safe space. And then allies came and said, hey, I want to help, I want to support, what does that look like? And so there was opportunity to educate, but also an opportunity to just build up each other. And so I think as a student, figuring out what that sphere of influence is for you. And then, like Katie shared earlier, letting your imagination run wild, not being afraid to say, I've never put on a Zoom meeting. I've never created a flyer and put it out into the universe of social media. Will people come? Try it. Just try it. Maybe that first time it's 2 people. Okay, then you keep going and trying something. So whatever platform that you can use, I say go for it.
Thank you. Thank you. So that was a great segue into kind of our last question. And before I ask it, for those of you who are listening in, feel free to put any questions you'd like to ask our panelists in the chat box, because I'm going to ask this last section of questions, and then we'll take your questions for a few minutes, and then we'll have a wrap up. So my last question is about racial trauma. Racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias or ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. And a lot of that happens right on our phones, on our TVs, et cetera, nowadays, as well as in person. So what resources would you recommend to students, staff, and faculty members who may need support due to racial trauma? And I'm going to tap Sweeann to start because I know she had some thoughts earlier.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And to kind of echo what Racquel was stating, it is important to find your community, but also it's important to be okay with asking for help. And on the university campus, we do have very many resources to help assist our students deal with their mental health and care. And the words of Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not an act of self-indulgence. It's an act of self-preservation, an act of political warfare. We can't pour onto others until we're fulfilled and okay within ourselves. So therefore, when we're doing the work, it's very important to be able to take care of ourselves and our mental health in the process. The Counseling Center is available for our CU students and our Auraria students as well. I know that there's counseling centers for each university, but you can reach the After Hours Crisis Support Hotline at 303-615-9911. And we also have the Counseling Center that's doing sessions, healing circles, and also doing digital Zoom meetings with students. As a student, you do qualify for 10 free sessions throughout the academic year. So it's definitely a great tool to go ahead and have. And it's important to mention that September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. We know that there's a lot of things that we are carrying, both inside and out. So it's important to highlight the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I can enter the information in the chat in a bit at 800-273-TALK. And just reach out. The most important thing is to reach out to a mentor, a professor. We are here for you, a graduate assistant, a fellow peer. We are here for you, and we want to know what's going on with you in order to guide you to those resources. Thank you.
And if you're a student leader listening and want to be part of that support system for others, I would direct you to the Wellness Center and Counseling Center websites, because there is a module that you can take online called Help a Friend. And it is an online class to help you learn that helping model and how you can support others and make good referrals to those helping services. And I would also refer you to the Listening Skills for Leaders workshop that this workshop series, the LEAD workshop series, has out on the Student Life YouTube channel. In that, Courtney, Kristen, and I talk about the helping skills model and how you can be a good listener and support your peers. So my last question in this area really is, you know, for people who are white identified and acknowledge and understand what racial trauma is, but may not have experienced it, is there anything that they can do to be supportive that is helpful and not harmful?
I'll just dive in a little bit. I think understanding the space that you're in and when to leave that space as well. Mm-hmm. I've had some white allies that came in and tried to tell us what we should be doing. And it's like, well, you know, we've been doing this for years, not saying that your ideas are wrong, but also understand this, understand the space you're in while you're supporting. Understand that sometimes you may not even be invited to some meetings. Sometimes there may be times where, you know, people may be angry at you because you may although you may not be a part of the system, you may be that physical representation of the system. And can you not take that personal?
Right.
Last but not least, is doing the work in your own community. When we began to talk about racism, we began to talk about power, when we began to talk about economic injustice, when we began to talk about the environment and things of this nature, what work are you doing in your own community to address these issues? To make sure that, are you having these discussions at the family table? Are you having them with your friends? Are you calling your friends out when they use the N-word or other derogatory statements? I want to know, it's easy to come over here and march with me, but I want to know what you're doing at your own dinner table to create systemic change. And I think those are some of the things that I think our allies can help us with. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. No, that was wonderful to hear. So I'm not seeing any questions in our chat. Oh yeah, Raquel, absolutely.
I think another thing is recognize already the emotional fatigue that folks in the community feel. And I recognize when these things happen nationwide, folks of all backgrounds hurt. But if you're one of our white allies, and you're coming to me to put you back together because you can't believe there's another Black body in the street, and now it's my job to kind of put you back together while also trying to deal with my own trauma, I would say go find another ally to help sort through that, so that you can be a support, not a person that's coming to take. That now I need to give to you. I need to give over here, but now I also need to give to you, where you're coming to our community to take more. Because that's what it feels like. It's a taking of more, as if we haven't given enough. Now I need to be the emotional support for you as you're sorting through that cognitive dissonance of, I can't believe this is tied to folks that look like me.
Thank you. Good points. All right, any final comments from our panelists?
I'll just add to that. I feel like do your own research. Like, you don't need to be sending emails like, send me recommendations for books. I get those emails all the time. The internet is a wonderful place. It is no longer, and it should never have been, our job as people of color to do this labor for you for free, when it is so accessible. So yeah, just like take initiative. And I know that it's getting past that initial, like, I'm scared to do the wrong thing, to say the wrong thing. And you have to accept very first that you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to do the wrong thing, and that's okay. And it's that you are constantly trying to match your intention with your impact, because sometimes you're gonna have good intentions, your impact isn't gonna be good, but it's understanding that it's just progress and it's action. Anti-racism is consistent action and consistent striving. Thank
you so much. All right, I don't see any chat questions, so I do want to direct you to the chat box if you're listening in. Student Life needs to gather data about who participates in our workshops, in your opinion, so that we can provide good conversation either through an interactive workshop or a panel like this. There is a super quick Qualtrics link in the chat box. If you'd like credit for this workshop as a student participant, if you don't know, you can earn a leadership certificate through our office, and this workshop would count toward that. We will upload your attendance in MyLinks, our student engagement platform, and it does ask maybe 3 or 4 opinion questions about today's event. So if you would click that before the session ends, it'll then be open on your computer screen, and we would appreciate that. So I would invite our panelists or anybody else who is on the call, if you have a comment, feel free to unmute yourself, and we would love to hear from you, and we'll wrap up in just a second.
Just want to say thank you, everyone, for the opportunity, for being here, and for letting me be part of the panel. The revolution is here, and it's time to help create that change we want.
Thank you, Sweeann. Okay, anybody else?
I want to thank you, send a thank you to Jamie. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. It has certainly been refreshing for those that are students who are considering doing this work. Understand that it is a journey. And I appreciate what Katie shared. We're going to make missteps, all of us. In some capacity, we have varying privileges. And so we've got to all check our own privilege, you know, when we step into a space, and we should step into spaces as learners. I encourage you to continue to learn, to educate yourself, to find others who are doing great work, and see how you can join in that fight. But I think now's the time to not be a bystander, to not sit on the sidelines. Change is going to happen, and we are writing the history right now. So where do you want to be in that story? So thanks for letting me be part of the conversation.
Now, I appreciate you joining us, and you bring that perspective from another institution as well. So thank you. Anybody else?
I'll just say this to all of my, and I'm not saying this from an age privilege perspective, but to all of my young leaders out there, I admire you and thank you for the work that you're doing. Let's just make sure when we're doing this work that you have someone you're checking in with to make sure you're okay. Check in with your family, make sure they're okay. Don't forget to have fun. Don't forget every now and then to have fun. Don't forget to put the phone down and just step away for a few minutes, because you may not realize all those police shootings you're seeing across the country, they're impacting you in some type of way. And last but not least, when I was telling y'all the story about being in that room with my father and the other professor, and I went in on them, the second part of that conversation and their advice was, did you get all the facts? Did you listen? And before you went out there on that tirade, did you check in? And so when we're out there protesting, let's make sure we have our facts together. Let's make sure we check in with all the key people. Make sure you have your data. Make sure that you are not burning bridges, but actually forming alliances for people to support your work and not end up going against you just because of the way you presented it, although it was with good intent.